The most ridiculous medieval battles in history. The Middle Ages, a time of knights, castles, plagues, and absolutely terrible decision-making. People in the medieval period did not have the internet, television, or basic sanitation. What they did have was swords, a lot of free time, and an extraordinary willingness to fight each other over almost anything. And sometimes, just sometimes, they managed to make warfare even more chaotic, more baffling, and more embarrassing than anyone thought possible. These are 6 of the most ridiculous medieval battles in history. Strap in. Number 1. The Battle of Karánsebes, 1788. We are starting with what may be the single most embarrassing military disaster ever recorded. In 1788, the Austrian army was marching through what is now Romania, preparing to fight the Ottoman Empire. They had not yet encountered the Ottomans. They did not need to, because the Austrian army decided to fight itself instead. Here is what happened. An advanced group of cavalry rode ahead to scout for enemies. Finding none, they did what any sensible soldier would do in the circumstances. They found some local people selling schnapps and started drinking. When the infantry arrived and also wanted schnapps, the cavalry said no. An argument broke out. Shots were fired. In the darkness and confusion, someone shouted that the Ottomans were attacking. Panic spread instantly. The entire Austrian army, tens of thousands of soldiers, began fleeing in terror from an enemy that was not there. Soldiers who did not speak the same language tried to identify each other in the dark. It went badly. More shooting started. Officers tried to restore order by shouting "halt" in German. Unfortunately, "halt" sounds quite a lot like Allah in the dark, at speed when everyone is panicking, which convinced even more soldiers that the Ottomans had definitely arrived. The army collapsed completely. Somewhere between 10,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. When the Ottomans actually arrived 2 days later, they found the Austrian army had already destroyed itself. They walked in basically unopposed. The Austrian army had managed to defeat the Austrian army, which is, by any measure, impressive. Number 2. The Battle of Hastings, 1066. The Battle of Hastings is one of the most famous battles in history, which is slightly unfortunate for England, because it did not go particularly well for England. In 1066, William the Conqueror sailed from Normandy with his army to claim the English throne. King Harold of England marched his army down to meet him. Harold had just fought another battle in the north, won it, and then immediately marched his exhausted army several hundred miles south, which in hindsight was perhaps not the ideal preparation strategy. The battle itself lasted most of a day. The Norman cavalry charged. The English shield wall held. Things were looking reasonable for Harold. And then, according to legend, Harold was hit in the eye by an arrow, which is a very bad thing to happen to anyone, but especially to a king in the middle of a battle he really needed to win. Harold died. His army collapsed. William won. England got a new king, a new language, a new ruling class, and several centuries of complicated feelings about the French. The arrow in the eye became one of the most famous moments in English history, which tells you quite a lot about English history. Number 3. The Battle of Crécy, 1346. The Battle of Crécy is a masterclass in what happens when one side adapts to new technology and the other side absolutely refuses to. In 1346, the English army under Edward III faced a much larger French force. The French had knights, proper armored knights on horses, the finest cavalry in Europe. Very expensive, very impressive, very confident. The English had longbowmen. The French looked at the longbowmen and thought, those are just peasants with sticks. This was a mistake. The English longbowmen could fire 10 to 12 arrows per minute. The French cavalry charged. The arrows flew. The horses panicked. The knights fell. The French charged again. More arrows. More fallen knights. The French charged approximately 15 times. Each time the longbowmen were ready. Each time the result was the same. By the end of the battle, the French had lost thousands of knights, and the English had lost a few hundred men. The French king watched his magnificent cavalry get systematically destroyed by peasants with sticks and could do absolutely nothing about it. The lesson was clear. Expensive armor is less useful than you think when someone is firing 12 arrows a minute at your horse. The French did not fully learn this lesson. They would need reminding at Agincourt. We will get to that. Number 4. The Siege of Weinsberg, 1140. Not every entry on this list is a disaster. Some of them are actually quite lovely. In 1140, King Conrad III of Germany besieged the castle of Weinsberg, which was held by his enemies. When the castle fell, Conrad declared that all the male defenders would be executed. However, he offered the women safe passage. He said the women could leave freely and could take with them whatever they could carry on their backs. The women of Weinsberg thought about this for a moment, and then they carried their husbands out on their backs. Every single one of them. The women walked out of the castle carrying their husbands, their fathers, their brothers, every male defender they could manage, on their backs. Conrad, to his considerable credit, found this so impressive that he allowed it. He had said whatever they could carry. He had not specified. The men survived. The castle of Weinsberg became known ever after as Weibertreue, which translates roughly as the loyalty of women. In a list of chaos, stupidity, and catastrophic decision-making, Weinsberg stands out as the one moment where someone found an extremely clever loophole and everyone was better off for it. Medieval history needed that. Number 5. The Dancing Plague of 1518. In July 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Trophea walked into the street and started dancing. She did not stop. She danced for days. Then other people joined her. Within a week, 34 people were dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg. Within a month, the number had risen to 400. Nobody knew why. Nobody could stop it. People danced until their feet bled. Some danced until their hearts gave out. The authorities, attempting to help, decided the best solution was to provide musicians and a stage, on the theory that if people were going to dance, they might as well do it properly. This did not help. Priests were called, shrines were visited, various theories were proposed, mass hysteria, ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, divine punishment for unspecified sins. Nobody really knew. Eventually, after several weeks, the dancing stopped as mysteriously as it had started. No confirmed cause has ever been established. The Dancing Plague of 1518 remains one of the strangest, most baffling events in medieval history. It was not a battle in the traditional sense. There was no enemy, no army, no strategy, just several hundred people in Strasbourg, dancing against their will, while the authorities stood around trying to look like they had the situation under control, which they absolutely did not. Number 6. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415. We end with arguably the most famous underdog victory in medieval history. In 1415, Henry V of England led an exhausted, outnumbered, dysentery-riddled army across France. His men were tired. They were sick. Many of them were suffering from conditions that are not particularly dignified to describe in a history video. The French army waiting for them at Agincourt was enormous. Estimates vary. But the French outnumbered the English significantly, possibly by 5-1. The French were fresh, well-equipped, confident. They had knights, proper armored knights, very expensive, very impressive. You would think they might have learned something from Crécy. They had not. The English longbowmen lined up. The French knights charged across a muddy field. The mud was extremely significant. Heavy armor and deep mud are not a good combination. The French knights, weighed down by their expensive equipment, struggled to move. The arrows flew. The horses panicked. The knights fell into the mud. Some reportedly drowned in it. The English, lighter and faster, cut through the struggling French cavalry. The battle that was supposed to be an easy French victory became one of the most catastrophic defeats in French military history. Henry V came home a hero. Shakespeare later wrote a play about it. The longbowmen got a pay rise, probably, and the French knights learned definitively and finally that charging at English longbowmen across a muddy field in very heavy armor was not a winning strategy. Only about 70 years after Crécy. Progress. So there we have it. 6 moments from the medieval period that remind us that history is not always noble, strategic, or particularly sensible. An army that defeated itself before the enemy arrived. A king killed by a single arrow. Knights who refused to learn from their mistakes, twice. Women who found the best loophole in siege warfare history. An entire city that just started dancing and could not stop. And an exhausted, dysentery-riddled army that somehow won anyway. The Middle Ages were many things. Dull was not one of them.